And welcome to today's webinar on rewriting our industry's narrative and the launch of Australia's 2021 Tourism Lexicon. My name is Andrew Hebel and I'm the CEO of the Association of Australian Convention Bureau, coming to you from Canberra, Australia. I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm hosting you today, and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation past, present and emerging. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples attending today. Before we begin, just some quick housekeeping. Firstly, this session is being recorded and we will be sharing the content and files after the session. We will do our best to facilitate questions if time permits, so please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Any questions that we don't get to during the live session, we'll look to respond out of session. I also ask that you remain on mute during the presentation, but please turn your videos on so that our presenter can see your smiling faces, even if that means putting aside your lunch if you're on the East Coast or putting breakfast to one side if you're on the West Coast. So our strategic leadership webinar series continues today on Words Matter. And we couldn't do this without the partnership of Destinations International. Realistically, it is an extension of last week's session with Jack Johnson on community shared values, and I'll let Andreas do that introduction during his presentation. Now, our presenter, Andreas Weissenborn, is the Vice President of Research and Advocacy at Destinations International. Andreas is not a born and bred visitor economy fan, but rather fell into the industry by chance via Visit Baltimore, where he stayed for almost 11 years working on its research, technology and information systems across the organisation. Andreas is now a passionate advocate, as you will see in his presentation. So Andreas, over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Andreas Weissenborn. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And I'm looking for a nod from at least someone to tell me they can see my screen. Thumbs up. All right, perfect. Thank you. Again, Andreas from Destinations International. I want to especially thank Andrew and AACB for the opportunity to participate in these strategic webinars. I am coming to you live from the basement in Washington, D.C. in my evening, so I'm pleased to be here with you for my evening. And want to go into what Andrew mentioned, is to unveil the new 2021 Tourism Lexicon for the country of Australia. So if you're not familiar, really briefly, Destinations International is the trade association for destination organizations around the globe. Destinations represents commonly sometimes referred to as DMOs, CVB, tourism boards, national tourism entities. We are the hopefully governing body for many of them across the globe. We represent about 600 destination organizations in 15 countries, representing a little bit over 5,000 individuals across the globe. Pretty simple mission. Our job is simply to help make our members do their job as best as we can. We do that through a couple means through community advocacy, research, and education. So these are things relating to our events, our initiatives, our education. Luckily, with my title, you get a 2-for-1 special from me today of our 4 core pillars. But I'm really excited to kind of continue where hopefully many of you got to see Jack Johnson, our Chief Advocacy Officer, talk a little bit last week about the value roadmap and into something very tactile, which is our tourism lexicon. I will do a brief sort of starting point with it for those who may have missed Jack's presentation, but to really give the lay of the land to best understand the tourism lexicon. And that is this corresponding starting point. So I always actually start with my title. I think people have a very easy base level understanding of what is research. You know, I think of my childhood with the Muppets and Beaker testing core samples, that type of stuff. But advocacy is one I think I get seen thrown around in a lot of different directions. So I want to give it what it means for us. And it really is a person, place, or organization that is willing to defend, articulate, or put forth a sense of ideas, ideals, values, beliefs, or even ideologies. So I thought the starting point for all of this is something Jack talked about last week, which is really our fundamental cornerstone. This is the public argument for why destination promotion and simply why destination organizations and why CVBs exist. The core foundational aspect of this is simple, is that we believe that what you do is a common or public good for the greater good. The same way we understand that we need clean water to be healthy, teachers to be educated, firefighters to be safe, doctors and nurses to be healthy. It's the same thing that our communities need to represent brand, to articulate our worth, to bring visitors and retain quality of place for our residents. That is what we do. And that is our fundamental cornerstone here. So what essentially calling is becoming a community shared value. This is, again, that core belief that what we do is a common or public good for the greater good. What we really outline to become a community shared value is 4 fundamental questions that every destination CVB needs to answer to become it. And these are a much abbreviated format from what you saw last week, but it's still important to go through because the final question really pivots the conversation to talking about how we talk about ourselves. So the very first thing is, what does the community need? Every community needs a brand. Every community then needs someone to be able to articulate and promote and advance that brand to both make sure residents are aware of it, but also visitors, convention goers, delegates who want to experience your destination. Now, the solution to be a steward of a brand and attract talent of a brand is you need an entity that engages in promotion, advertising, selling of that experience. That leads us to only one solution to do that, and that is a destination organization or a CVB or a DMO. No other entity is uniquely qualified in a community to sit across the table across civic, public, and private entities and bring them all together. That is what you all do day in and day out. And the last question, and this is what will pivot us to talking about the lexicon, is who are we fundamentally helping? Our number one customer is our resident. It is our community. That is what our greatest efforts enable and benefit is our residents and our community. I often have to remind our members that we do not create quality of life. What we do create is quality of place, which influences quality of life. That directly affects residents, but more importantly, when you create a place that people want to visit or live or work, we all know, has trickle-down effects for the greater tourism economy, our quality of life, and so on and so forth. So if I'm saying that our number one customer is our resident of our community, it does change a little bit of changing of actually how we engage them. So how do we actually start this? And it's really simple. It's one, how do we value ourselves? And the part that I want to talk about today is actually how do we talk about ourselves? Jack spent all of last week talking about the values and the roadmap, and I would highly encourage you to check out that recording and check out the PowerPoint and the work that comes with it. But today, I want to talk about how do we talk about ourselves. More importantly, my favorite word, our swagger. So let's go back to the 4th question again, was who is our customer? And it is the residents of our community. Now, when you say that, you have to understand that when your customer is your resident, that also includes elected officials. I always have to remind people that elected officials are residents too. And what we have to do is actually speak in a manner that connects with residents. We often make the joke, does what your corresponding partner, does your partner or spouse know what you do? I can answer that today as a married man, that my wife sometimes questions, doesn't understand if I'm making websites or so on and so forth. But the problem with that, though, is that your partner or spouse doesn't know what you do, your neighbor doesn't, your community official, so on and so forth. And that's a problem, because if they don't know what you do, then they have a core problem of understanding you and valuing you, and hopefully, more importantly, getting a chance to fund you and believe in you. And a big reason is our own fault. We use terms and jargon a lot of times that just fly over the head of everyday individuals. Things like room nights, visitor spend, direct spend, and so on and so forth. All these are very heavy industry logical terms. But here's the thing. Even before the pandemic, I can make the argument we have largely been living in illogical times. We live in a very, very emotional-based timeline. And here's the thing. Anyone who ever has gotten in an argument with this understands you cannot win an emotional argument with logic, and you cannot win a logic argument with emotion. Now, what I'm saying is not that we have to go away from logic, is that we really have to start to pivot to how we approach our value. And is that it's actually leading with emotion and story, but make sure we back it up with logic and ROI. And that has led us to what we've called basically our tourism lexicon, connecting again, the core fundamental ethos of a common or public good for the greater good. Now, at the very beginning, I mentioned some of the key things that we originally saw as common or public goods for society. Again, we mentioned things like clean water, economic development, education, safety, infrastructure. These include things like teachers and firefighters and so on and so forth. So what we decided to do was to say, well, if we want to talk about ourselves as a common good, well, how do actually politicians, when they literally talk about other common goods, what are the words that they use? So what we did was we actually researched and scraped how do public officials at the federal or state or local level, when they use social media, which politicians seem to love to do nowadays, what are the little words that surround when they engage in these core topics? And we noticed an aha moment. We noticed that whenever a politician tweets or Facebooks or Instagrams or press releases, so on and so forth, we started noticing a core set of words that appear at every one of these common or public goods. And we started to realize that, there is probably something here, because a lot of these words were very absent from our tourism lingo, our annual reports, our press releases, our vision statements, our economic analysis reports that were missing from our core materials. So in 2018, we introduced the first iteration of this, which was at the time only in the United States, was our tourism lexicon for 2018. It was a simple core 10 words that we sort of advertised to all our members, saying, it's no longer about describing about all the jobs you create. It's actually more talking about the people in your community you put to work every day. Again, a small but subtle shift, but one a little more emotional and storied in approach than one that's heavy on logic. So we followed that up again in 2019, again, only in the United States, of expanding to actually 20 words, but the same premise. And of course, like a lot of us, at the end of 2019, we were expecting to go into 2020 with a couple additional bigger plans with the tourism lexicon. But like a lot of things, the pandemic kind of got in the middle of all of us, but it didn't change where we really fundamentally wanted to go. So a couple core things of 2020, and I'll get to the 2021 tourism lexicon. The first was that we did expand globally. So on your screen today is actually the old 2020 iteration of the tourism lexicon for Australia. The words in blue are actually unique to just the Australian market. This is interesting to us because one thing that we noticed right away, as opposed to the other countries we looked at, Canada, United States, and Great Britain, was how the words ranked differently across other countries. So, for example, most prominently in 2020, the word government was in the top 5 words. That was so interesting because largely here in the United States, there's a general distrust and usage of the word government, much more so than any other parts of the socialized world. So you can see here a much higher emphasis on the word government as opposed to the word business, which is near the bottom. Business, however, in the United States was ranked much higher, largely for our qualification for, for-profit and a capitalistic aspect of it. But it also gave us a sense of some values here that started to appear that we noticed through 2020. As I mentioned, we did go global and looked at a couple of different countries, and we also looked at it through the pandemic and the COVID-19. And that's when we actually started noticing themes and values. Values is actually what led to the roadmap, but in particular, when we looked at a side-by-side of Canada and the United States, we know, even though you notice some of the words are flip-flopped in ranking, there was a core theme that stuck out, was that people needed help and people needed support. We took that and understood that no matter what we put forth of our work and our worth, for it to resonate during 2020, it had to be through that value, that we were fundamentally helping people get support and helping people get attention, helping people get noticed, and helping get just general information for the benefit of their community. So how do we do it? A little bit of the how the sausage is made. So what we do is we look at a large global set of how public officials talk on the social media. So this includes, like I mentioned, everything: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Not quite TikTok yet. I do hope the day that I get to scour politicians' TikToks for how they talk about tourism. But we look through over 2 million plus statements and press releases and newsletters and start looking at how are the words and what are they actually talking about, those other common goods relating to our sector. We eliminate stuff like shop talk, like the ums and ahs and stuff like that. And what that does is that leaves us with a unique set of words to our expanded set of goods. And so, for example, in the Australian market in particular, one that we noticed took a great interest to is how you all talk about your primaries. In particular, how politicians talk explicitly about things like agriculture or mining. You can see here words that revolve around, community, commitment, time, and so on and so forth. And subsequently, when I do a little research and look at these particular primaries, you can see not only how much politicians talk about these particular sectors and primaries, but also how much they value and fund them. And that's what the lexicon is geared to do, is to help try to elevate how you speak and talk about yourself the same way as this, so that other politicians come and get the chance to see and value and essentially hopefully fund you. So let's actually get to the 2021 iteration. I will leave this up on the screen for an extended period of time, but just to remind everyone, it will be shared out afterward. So when we got into 2021, we realized that 2020 was essentially an apex year, that it had changed so much of our communities from where we were in 2018, that going back to just simply only the common good wasn't enough. We realized we had to go one step further and really talk an expanded set of additional goods. So it wasn't just common and public, but it's also how do we talk about civic, social, equitable, and still very much in the pandemic, as noted by the new variant on Friday, and vaccine that we're all in. We realized that the common good approach, honestly, is a little bit 10 years behind the time. We should have been talking about ourselves like this 10 years ago. And we were just now finally catching up. 2020, like a lot of things, accelerated so much of social, civic, equitable change in our communities that we thought we had to also expand how we also looked and captured how politicians talk about the same goods. So with that, let me bring up the 2021 Australian Lexicon. So first and foremost, I'd be kind of a crappy researcher if I didn't show the corresponding research that goes behind this. So one of the fun things I get to do today is actually show how did the words change over year, or if they didn't change at all. Most notable on the very first word with the bullet is people. That did not change at all over year to year. This is the only country to exhibit this behavior. And I think that's rather interesting that Australia, first and foremost, keeps its values of its people top of mind. Now, as a spoiler, if you look at some of the American iterations of words, people is not at the top. It ebbs and flows a couple, but never has it been seen year over year. But if you look at the other two right behind it, health and community. Community, especially, I noted, would jump the highest of any word in the tourism lexicon from where it was the previous year. But health is not just individual or relating to COVID. We're actually fundamentally talking about the health of your community, the health of our infrastructure, health of our sector in particular. One other note that's of interest here, you notice I several I put that are labeled as new, and that's the word vaccination. This is particularly of interest to the country of Australia because you all have done an incredible effort with advocating to get vaccinated through your particular sector's mean. In particular, I look at the hashtag that's under Andrew's name right now that says give BE a shot. This is incredible that you are actually connecting the dots between the business events and convention business industry and the benefit of to get vaccinated, to be vaccinated, to promote health and wellness. This is very, sadly to say, as an American, unique to your market that I wish we could adopt on our side, as we, have not had the best record with the pandemic and getting vaccinated here. But then take a look again at the further right. All those set of new words, these firmly sit in to what we're calling the expanded set of goods. In particular, the words to hear or to listen. Really, we're garnering a sense of empathy towards our communities, what we're going with, and actually listening and articulating what the needs and values are. But going a step further here, our fairness. another word steeped in equity. And again, articulating our work and our worth as our collective. These are unique to us. And I think they represent for the first time a set of words that are not steeped so much in just industry ROI, or this is the visitor spend or the direct spend or the heads and beds. I think Andrew gave it one last time, bums and seats. I think that's the one he said last time, that we're going a little bit beyond that and actually really applying, as I mentioned before, a storied or emotional or compassionate argument for why we do what we do in a different way. So let me move on and give a little more context for you all, and still the same words. So one thing I also wanted to return, which words were unique to just Australia? And these are what they are in dark blue. In particular, I mentioned one, vaccinate, but also the day, or to get the best out of the day. Home, which I was fascinated by, that this one exists solely in the Australian market, that the actually emphasis on your home. But you could take it a different way. When you attract visitors to your destination, you are in fact bringing guests to experience your home, as well as I mentioned, to hear or to listen, to think, or society, or a society that thinks. And in addition, one other part of the research of the lexicon I did want to provide to you is that I know many of you as destination convention marketers, you are marketing your destination not to solely Australians, but other parts of the world. So it would make sense to have a set of words that actually work across the globe. So one part of the analysis I did provide was which words do appear across right now, currently all our English speaking countries. And these are these 10 right here. So you can see here, and again, a small demonstration isn't necessarily just word smithing, just take a word and replace it with this. One common example, and I'll get into in the last of the webinar series, is we have a tool called the Event Impact Calculator. It produces a lot of stats and a lot of ROI and a lot of KPIs, very steeped in taxes and jobs and so on and so forth. But to revise it, you wouldn't be saying, okay, this event, produced, as I mentioned, 10,000 jobs. Instead, I would say, no, this opportunity put 10,000 people to work in their community every day, helping the viability and health of our neighborhoods, our downtowns, and our communities because of our collective work. So all three of those will be in the slides and the presentation after this, but I wanted to kind of talk through now how and actually where do you use it? So you have a sense of how to apply this. And the thing is, I have to always articulate, you're not alone. We had to go through this process too when we started with this. So when we started with the lexicon in 2018, we started with the most reputable place on the internet, Wikipedia. And that was our definition. When originally was back in late 2017, early 2018 was, what was the definition of a DMO, desertizations, or a CVB? And we changed it to one now that actually is laden with the lexicon and really essentially the common aspect of being a community shared value. Surprisingly, it's actually not hard to change for those who are curious how to change Wikipedia, and I always have to check. Still there today. But we didn't want to stop there. Something we also knew that it wasn't just good enough for myself and the advocacy team members to talk about the lexicon. I needed my entire team, my entire organization to talk like this. So everyone from my accountant to my marketing, most importantly, my membership, we actually went through a full day-long exercise, very much similar to what the webinars we've been going through day long with the team, and went through the same fundamentals. What was the cornerstone? What is the community shared value roadmap? What was the lexicon at the time? And actually broke the team up into a couple of mock groups and actually went through case studies and mock mission, vision, and about us statements through the lexicon itself. And what happened after that was that our fundamental voicing started to change. Our website was kind of stripped away from a lot of those very heavy metric focused items and actually started to be a new voice around the lexicon, the community shared value, the common good for the greater good, aspects of transparency and passion and so on and so forth, all started to flow through our website, our comms, our mission and about us and so on and so forth. And I mentioned the core aspect to me was it wasn't just me speaking like this, but my accounting department. They all understood the members and the work, and more importantly, the work that we provide to our communities. But there's a couple core aspects of where to begin. The first and foremost is train. What I'm showing you today, you will all get a copy of. Take it and run through it with your staff, but more importantly, run through it with your board members. Those are your biggest advocates. Make sure that when they are publicly speaking about representing you, they also talk in a language that connects with as many as possible. Once you get that underway, you can take it a couple steps further, right? Your mission, your vision are about us. And I've shown you a kind of example of how that looks like when it's changed, but also then your biggest channels you have. Use the same thing I use to procure the lexicon, but your social media, your newsletters, and your press releases. Once you start having that all kind of dialed in, it starts to become muscle memory. And that's when we really start looking at everything that is a public facing document, your business plan, strategic planning, towards the master planning, development plans, so on and so forth, till you get to a point where if you sound like me, you start saying the words community, people, invest, worker over and over again. It becomes second nature to how you speak. And that's where you essentially become a community shared asset to all the values. And let me kind of show an example of one destination that took this same approach. So this is the mission, vision, and about us. We, of course, was separated all for Visit Phoenix in Arizona here in the United States. This was the same, as I was told, from the late 80s. And when the comms individual, the communications individual came to us, said, we really want to start with staff just to care about what they do. And so we want to take what this current web thing says. And again, you can see there it says stuff like lower taxes, create jobs, sustainable government, so on and so forth, and revenues. We really wanted to connect back so people fundamentally care and value not only as staffing, but hopefully the community does. And the thing is, a mission statement is your most public document you have on the website, that if someone's trying to figure out what you do, you have to get it right in the first impression it is. And this is what they changed it to. You don't have to worry about reading the full extent of it. My favorite part is actually the last, and that's the vision statement. The very last sentence, I would really say, Greater Phoenix will achieve a healthy and sustainable visitor industry for the enjoyment of the visitor and the benefit of the local community. This is still on their website. I had to check, and luckily it's still there. But most importantly, as I mentioned, this is their front door, their first impression. If anyone's trying to figure out who and what they do, they nail it right there and then. More importantly, they also add a value of transparency here. Was not only if you want to find out about what we do and how we do it, oh, by the way, and that ROI backup. Here's our annual report. Here's why visitors matter. Here's how you can become a member if you want to engage in our community. But it doesn't just stop there. We can also course correct a lot of our old sayings that we see over and over and over again in our press releases and so forth. So I did that. So what I did was actually look through a couple of Australian CVBs, and I'm not going to name names, but of press releases and itemizations of reports that come out that we can rework through the tourism lexicon. So here's a pretty common one. Driving business and revenues by booking and servicing citywide conventions, meetings, and sporting events, and so and so. Sound familiar? Let's change it. It's actually providing business opportunities and the needs at our local hotel, meetings, and event facilities. Again, opportunities and need and local, driving home that emotional context that what you do matters, and more importantly, matters to the resident. Another one. Again, this one actually, you see this across Americas, Australia, Great Britain, and so forth. Everyone likes to talk about how much their market grew in domestic travel and so on and so forth and visitors. But let's actually change that so it gives it a face. Our nation's travel economy increased so and so, but we providing 24 million people to experience our community. You are essentially articulating that these are guests to your home, and how they experience your community is vital. Again, these are subtle emotional changes, and if people question you on, say, you sound like you're doing a lot of great things, can you back it up? You hit them right away with that ROI statement. But at least you're getting a foot in the door, people getting a chance to fundamentally understand you on some basic terminology. And one of my favorites right here is, and visiting is important because tourism and meetings mean business, economic prosperity, and most importantly, jobs. Although it's true, What we're trying to say is experiencing our community is paramount. Tourism and business events provide opportunity, investment to work to our local family, friends, and neighbors. Now, I want to kind of recap all this to why the lexicon matters. And that's this, is that I do fundamentally believe that words matter and the words back up our facts. But that's not to say that actions do not speak louder than words. One of the many governors and states and provinces we track here, I often see people in the political sphere talk very, very positively about our sector. But then when it comes to acting, meaning funding or legislation, that's where it starts to peter out. So as I mentioned, words do matter. They have a way of us engaging with our work, but they help, more importantly, back up our action. And to be fundamentally valued and successful, you need both in continuity. That's why it's so important that what we kind of showed last week, the value component of it, the lexicon is a way to actually properly articulate that. So I kind of want to end on some of my favorite phrases and really kind of set the recap of a lot of what you've learned over the past 3 with the Destination Next study, the valued roadmap, and now with the lexicon. And that is this, as I mentioned, understand we are in a paradigm shift. The fundamental ground, political, social, equity has started to change. There is no more new normal. I know a lot of people say it's a scrape away from new normal, and I'm with that. What I like saying instead is that we are in the next normal, and tomorrow is going to be another next normal. And the day after that, a week after that, a year after that, they're all going to be a next normal. And what we have to remember, though, is that through it all, our work and our worth is important. And our job is to make sure everyone knows that, values that, and hopefully, again, comes the chance to fund us. And understand at the end, our words matter, and we have to use them to articulate our actions. So let me give you some of my favorite phrasings from the lexicon, a way to articulate our work. So the first, we work hard to tell our community's story, defend its brand, steward the brand, but drive investment opportunities in our neighborhoods. As I mentioned, in our neighborhoods benefits not only our suppliers like our hoteliers and our restaurateurs and our attractions, but your family and friends as well. You put people to work in your community every day. Again, if you haven't tell, my favorite word of all this is community. And that's because this is that I could do fundamentally believe that tourism builds community. So with that, I want to again thank AACV for the opportunity with, I will stop sharing my screen and want to have a dialogue with any of you for questions on lexicon or the values or whatever I can help answer with this presentation today. So stop sharing and we're live.
Fantastic.
Claps. Thank you.
Virtual claps, yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That's just a great presentation. I think spins everyone in their seats with regard to content and how we've been promoting ourselves. But we've got about 10 minutes to play. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to either take them through the chat, or if you want to put your hand up, we can do it live, directly person to person, that's fine as well. But just to start with, I guess, the bit that I picked up mainly was that this is how to explain our sector in used terms back to our communities, to sort of explain our value and worth. Have you seen the use of the lexicon to actually use focus grouped wordsmithing back on the political cycle as well as part of the advocacy pathway?
Yes, absolutely. I think what I have to remind everyone of individuals is that politicians can at times be lazy, but they want to boast. If they represent your area or your community, they want to know cool stuff that's happening, especially if you're successful. Tourism is one of the greatest feel-good sectors of the world. And one thing that I've seen many destinations do, in part with the lexicon, is that they've done simple things like just sharing their tweets, their press releases and stuff, or they'll slip them to their local governor or mayor or city council before they go public, so they have the ability for them to share them themselves. So they get a kind of chance to take part in it. Another example, as I mentioned, I can't overestimate the importance of your board. A lot of boards are politicians on there. Their job is to represent your sector, your organization, to the best of its ability. So getting some of those materials in Late and Speak Like This, because they're going to go into rooms and conversations that we cannot get into as destination organizations. That's the beauty of having a board. So having them armed with, those press releases or annual reports that articulate our work and our worth in a couple simple and succinct and emotional, phrasings is priceless. And that's really where I think the real work is done. I know it's very romanticized to do elaborate annual reports and sheet documents, and that's great. You should be doing that. But small things, just sometimes retweets or pushes out of basic comms plans to your politicians, they'll become your allies quickly, because if you have something great to share and show of your destination, they want to be the first to know it. So the lexicon is a very quick way to help articulate that.
Do we have any questions from the Zoom crowd? No hands up yet. In terms of, great to see examples of the lexicon put to use, because I think without seeing those, it would seem, pie in the sky to some degree. But taking it one step further, have you seen any examples of destinations who've really embraced the lexicon that have actually achieved cut through in recognition of what they do, both in a community related sense, or maybe in terms of through government budget processes, actually, holding down budgets or increasing them, those sorts of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give a small spoiler for the next webinar in regards to the event impact calculator. But one of our favorite destinations that I've got to witness this is Victoria, British Columbia. So the very beginning onset of the pandemic, like a lot of us, business events in particular was being canceled or closed or lost. And the community of Victoria, the destination organization, the CDB there, articulated their loss through the lexicon to their local officials. That was, at the time, was the local province tourism minister. What they did was they didn't just say, we're losing 30 events. No, what they actually articulated was, no, we are going to miss out on, at the time, I think it was something $20 to $30 million of our investment in our community that will be gone. And when they said it in that way, the government took notice and said, okay, how can we help you right away? How can we help sustain this? And what happened was, more importantly, was that they actually fundamentally valued them. And what happened was they were one of the first organizations that I was aware of to get supplemental funding just to stay afloat. Most importantly, because when you fundamentally understand something and can value it, you'll fund it. And that's what I think a big example was with that. If they probably would have just gave them a report laden with stats and ROI at the time of the pandemic, since we're all, trying to bail water out of a sinking ship in some ways, trying to stay afloat, it probably wouldn't have connected as much as it did what they articulated, saying, no, in this year, our neighborhoods, our downtowns are going to suffer. And here's why. And that added an olive branch to it. And I think in a lot of ways it helped get them through. And I think a lot of destinations have done examples like that. It's really taking what we do day in and day out and just a slightly different spin on its articulation that hopefully maybe connects with a new audience to value us and support us.
See a hand up from Lisa in New Zealand.
All right, everyone. Thanks for letting the cousin from across the ditch join. I'll just expand on my Kiwi accent and make it worse. I thought that was such an inspiring presentation, Andreas. Thank you. And Andrew, thank you so much for letting me join. One of the questions I have, and you may have just touched on it a little bit, is how can you best use the lexicon to also drive social license? Because we're in this kind of, and I'm not quite sure if it's the same over on the western side of the Tasman, but we have an issue where we're obviously trying to drive the message through politicians, and it's just starting to really stick now. So that's good. It's kind of a tick there. But now we've really got to try and drive this into the communities to demonstrate there's a reason why we want borders open, and there's a reason why we want to see business events coming back. So how do you suggest it's used?
So two things, I guess, as part of this. The first is don't underestimate that you all have the greatest medium for connecting with your residents. And that is all of you own the brand and the social media channels itself. It's a very simple and easy way to connect with those maybe sometimes may considered unusual suspects, but the number one customer to engage with that, you know, like a lot of us probably don't get our newsletters, they don't get our annual reports and press releases and so forth. So making sure that you are on brand, on message with your social media, first and foremost, should be your starting point. I think something else, if you're not already doing it, is to make sure that if you have campaigns, advertisements, and promotion, make sure that they are showing in market. I think that's something that we a lot of times are remiss, is that we only show, you know, in the United States, it's very common to say, well, we only show what we do, you know, to people who want to stay the night, and we don't show it to people who live in our community. And so people have no understanding whatsoever about what a CVB or bureau does. And that means that you have to, when you're already in a crisis or a pandemic like we're in, you're kind of already a little bit of a net negative. You don't have people who have fundamentally understanding with it. The other, which I think is also every destination should do, is we do tons and tons and tons of focus groups and surveys on our meeting planners and our suppliers and so on and so forth. But seldom do we actually do resident sentiment analysis. How do actually people fundamentally feel about tourism? So you can't really address, you know, their needs or whatnot if we have no idea as a baseline as part of it. There, and again, there are solutions to that, you know, to do, but that's, I think, a starting point for every approach to engaging a community is take the same lessons we know with suppliers and so on and so forth, but starting with just something simply as a resident sentiment survey. You know, with social media, it's great because they're very simple quizzes and surveys and polls there to do it. But a very hardened effort at actually looking and then tracking that year over year to see how people in your community feel about tourism and promotion. It allows you to then to pivot, look at the dials, where do you get to turn up, turn less, so that you never get in a situation, because I don't fundamentally believe in over tourism. What I believe is a failure in destination management. And having at least some sentiment analysis of your residents allows you to keep a close eye and management of your core values and brand and stewardship, so that it always is connecting with your residents, so that they don't kind of seem, they become your allies and assets. That's what you fundamentally want. So great question though.
Thank you.
I think from a business events perspective, we've done quite well at broadening the narrative from just visitor impact to looking at the legacy benefits of some of the business events and conventions that we attract to Australia. Things like investment, innovation, increases in productivity. I think we've done that well, and probably even led to a degree. I'll be a bit biased from maybe this corner of the world in those thoughts. But the thing that we haven't done is converted that to the impact on the local community, because it seems like they're benefits for other people. So I'm wondering whether through the lens of the tourism lexicon and still, you know, focusing on those legacy benefits, but being able to pitch them back to benefits to our communities, that would certainly help us improve our traction, I guess, in recognition for what we do.
Yeah, and one of the sectors you don't have to look far to draw inspiration of is one of the benefits I have to do with looking at the lexicon is watching hours and hours of Parliament video and voting sessions. And you can see how those politicians talk about those primaries. When they talk about agriculture or mining or so on and so forth, you can see the passion, the emotion that stands behind it. And guess what? Funding gets to them first. They're always top of the list. Something we make this argument over here all the time. No politician ever goes to the table and says, you know what, budget's tight this year, let's just not do teachers. But that happens over and over and over again with tourism. And I think that's because we have gone decades of just not, we've walked the walk, but we've not talked the talk. Our swagger has been kind of off with connecting to it. And I look at some of these other, like I said, common or public goods or primaries, how they talk about their sector. That's kind of where we need to go. And I think that will help grow clout of social license, but also our civic, social, and equitable roles that we also play in our community, because we have a hand in all of them.
Now, I know we've hit time, but I did have one very detailed question from the words. Something that we hear a lot and have so for the past 3 years, probably we're coming up to election cycle here in Australia, we'll probably hear it a bit more, is the word jobs. Now, I noticed in the lexicon there was more of a switch towards the term worker or workers.
Yes.
Can you sort of explain the interplay between the difference between those two words and how they're used emotionally, perhaps?
Sure. I think this is something that definitely comes and goes with, timelines. So as I've talked to Jack, who's a little bit older than me, don't tell him I told him that, he would always talk to me that in his growing up, jobs were really in fashion. You always talked about getting your job, blue collar jobs, white collar jobs, so on and so forth. What we started to see as a society, especially with the demographics, is that people are no longer looking for just a job, particularly the millennials and Gen Zs. I'll out myself, I am a little bit on the older side, but I'm a millennial, is that we look for fundamental values and beliefs in the work that we do. We'd like to believe that the work we do, that we're working for and working with, is for a greater good that serves something bigger. I think it's more the shifting demographic away from the silent generation, the baby boomers, more towards a value-based population, which is with the millennials, which is the largest growing population there, and Gen Zs, that a job doesn't cut it anymore. People want to value the work that they do. So that's why you do see on there heavy emphasis on, as I said, to work. We are working or worker or working towards something versus just saying, well, I have a job. So you can blame the millennials if you want.
Fantastic. Now, look, thank you so much. I'm sure everyone who's tuned in live or who watched the recording of this will really think twice about, checking their websites, checking their mission statements and visions and seeing what they can apply. Just finally, is there a place we can go to on the Destinations International website to see examples of how to put those words into action?
Yes, absolutely. So on the website, we have, I call it a hamburger menu, but you'll see under the advocacy section, we expanded, is our tourism lexicon. So not only will you see your words, the Australian, the other countries, but also a lot of our evergreen pieces and blogs and materials that are related to the lexicon over the past couple of years. There's a lot of great materials in there, teachings. A lot of it is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can see how other destinations do it. But I would encourage all of you to take the latter parts of the slide where I talked about the roadmap, how to train, start there, print it out. One of the greatest things I've ever got to experience is visiting my members and seeing in the cubicles, people have just printed out the words so that when they are about to write a press release or whatnot, as a starting point. And I would actually encourage you all, if you use it, please send it to me. I love seeing how it's used, whether it's a new mission, vision, or just a tweet. It doesn't have to be extensive. I love seeing it in the same site. But yes, the Destination International website, under advocacy, you'll see a full lexicon section, and will be updated shortly to include your new words that you guys are seeing exclusively today. So
fantastic. Look, thanks so much. Thanks for everyone who took the time out of their day to dial in, or those who are watching this recording. We'll be back again, same time, same place next week with an exclusive interview of CEO and President of Destinations International, Don Welsh, which I can't wait to participate in. And look, have a fantastic day and great week ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.